What's up, animators, and welcome back to part 5 of my course with a very long name, Going Strong. We're making this beautiful abandoned house in the forest, and in the last part we kind of swayed away from the house a little bit to work on the tree models. I hope you did your homework. I want to see your trees. Share them in my Discord server. I want to see your trees. This part will be similar. We'll make other assets, but then we'll come back to the main project in the end, where we throw all the trees and all the foliage and rocks and everything into the main project, and it's really gonna come to life. Buckle up, because this one's gonna be fun. If you like the course, as always, drop a like, subscribe, all the good stuff. You can also join my Discord server with the friendly community for feedback, for help. I'm also answering questions in the comment section, so if you have any questions, let me know. Last time I mentioned I'm gonna get some models online, and there's a big dispute in the artist community whether or not this is right or wrong. Some people say this is cheating because as an artist you have to make everything yourself or you're plagiarizing, but I think that not only is that a very stupid argument because you're more than capable of creating a tree. We made 2 really nice ones just now, and you could make an even better one if you actually took more time for it. We took a very quick route. Trees are something that everybody needs, and it's been done a million times, and they take a lot of time just to fill the backdrop, which is not even the main motive of your art. It becomes more of an obvious choice when you have deadlines to reach, a client needs it, or you're doing it as a hobby, and spending all this time making assets that are somewhere in the background is just not worth your time. People have put these assets onto these sites. You've purchased them legitimately, or if the model is free, the artist who made it with the purpose so it can be used by other people. I think as long as you use it sparingly and it's not the main motive of your image, it's perfectly fine to take other people's assets. So for the rest of the foliage, I'll be getting those online. And you can find plenty of those on 3D asset sites such as CG Trader, TurboSquid, or Sketchfab. So browse these sites, type what you want, look at what you like. You can take free models, you can buy some if you really like them, and once you have all of them, you should organize them in your files. I, for example, made another folder inside my model folder for all the downloaded stuff. And I also made a folder in my textures folder for all the downloaded textures. But there's a problem with taking assets online because they're usually not prepared in the optimal way for your project, so you have to fix them. Which is why I'll put the links to everything that I downloaded in the description of this video, so you can follow along exactly as I'm fixing these models. So after I've thrown everything into their correct folders, I want to bring all of these into Blender. I'll save my tree project and make a new one, which I'll instantly save in the models folder, call it tree 3 or something. I want to import the model that had me download a Blender scene. And I'll do that by dropping down File and clicking Append. Append lets you bring stuff from other projects into your project. Simply locate the Blender project, and when you open them, you're greeted with all these different folders, so you can choose what you want to import. If we're importing objects, it's almost always useful to just import the entire collection. So I'm gonna import the only collection that this has, and it contains all the tree models because this is what I've downloaded. If I turn on the material view, it already has all the materials, but I want to open them in render mode to see if they're good. And of course, use the Cycles render engine because that's what we're using. So it looks like there's something wrong with the leaves, but in the shader editor, everything seems fine. So let's use our knowledge to troubleshoot what the problem is. So again, open the shader editor and select the leaves material. It's only using the base color and the alpha inputs, so if we shift right click them to preview, they both look fine, so something else has to be the issue. But if you look at the material, we can see the emission color is black and the emission strength is 1. So maybe it's trying to emit black light and that's why it's white. So let's drop this emission strength down to 0. Nope, that's not the issue. Looking at everything, I can see the material output tab is only set to Eevee. This means that this material will only work in Eevee. So if I change this into Cycles or All, it should now work fine. The material also has metallic set all the way to 1 and specular all the way to 1. So because of metallic, the leaves are technically made of metal, so that's wrong, put that down to 0. And the specular value is default at 0.5. All of our other materials are on 0.5, and we've used the roughness map before, so this should be done the same way. Put this down to 0.5. All of these trees have different materials, so we have to do this for all of them. So change this into Cycles, metallic to 0, specularity to 0.5. But as I'm clicking around, I can see that all of these materials are using the same textures. So it makes no sense to have all these separate materials if they're all the same. So if we click on a tree, we can swap this material in the dropdown and just give the same material to all of the trees. That way, when you change one, you'll change all of them. I also want to swap the wood texture because this one doesn't look too nice. And I'm gonna go to polyhaven.com, find a nice bark texture, and this time in the format, I'm gonna choose zip because that lets me choose which maps I actually want and which ones I don't. I'll turn everything off except diffuse, roughness, and normal GL. The difference between normal GL and normal DX is just that one of the color channels is flipped around. Blender uses normal GL, so we're using normal GL. You could flip it around manually, but that's extra work, and we don't have to do that, so just use GL. Download and save all these textures, and I'll drag them into the material. Except that I forgot to tick all the boxes off, so we have a lot of textures in here. Anyway, just drag in base color, roughness, and normal GL. That's all we need. Connect them up like normal, set these to non-color, run the normal through normal map. Nothing new, except I want to change the color a little bit. So I'm gonna press Shift A to add a new node, and it's gonna be the hue saturation value node. I'm just gonna drop it in between here so it gets connected automatically, and I'm gonna bring the saturation up a little bit and shift the hue towards orange, so now it looks very pretty. And for good measure, I'm gonna add the ambient occlusion map, which is usually named AO, so drag it in. The ambient occlusion map kind of marks the absence of natural light due to crevices and stuff. I've talked about this in part 3. So plop it in, set it to non-color. This is not color information, this is shadows, and we're going to multiply it on top of our base color. Why multiply? I explained in part 3, but I'll say it again. White pixels have a value of 1, black pixels have a value of 0, anything in between is anything in between. And when you multiply anything with 0, you'll always get 0. When you multiply anything with white, you get the same number. So if you multiply this on top, the texture will stay the same, except it's gonna get darker where all the gray values are. So add a mix node, set it to color, plug the hue shifted base color into socket 1, and plug the ambient occlusion into the second socket. But we don't want to mix them, we want to multiply them. So change this mix into multiply, and now I can drag this factor slider up and down to increase the intensity of this. Quick explanation for all the nerds out there. You can skip this part if you want, but if you want to learn how it works, you can stick around. The way multiply works is quite literal. Images are nothing but values from 0 to 1 on red, green, and blue channels. To get the color yellow, you need values in the red and green channel, but not in the blue one. This is because of how additive light mixing works, because we're working with colors, this is how computers work. So remember this chart. Although you might be more used to subtractive light mixing, from art class, but this is how pigments work, so physical colors. Light is different. If you give all 3 red, green, and blue channels the same value, it's just gonna be gray. This is how black and white images work, where white is where all of them are at 1, and black is where all of them are at 0. If there's more of one color, then it's gonna get tinted. So when you multiply 2 images, you're literally taking these values and multiplying them with these ones. Red and red together, green and green together, and blue together. And like I said before, anything that's white, it's all 1, and anything that's black, it's all 0. The gray values in between are just values in between. So when you multiply anything with 1, you get the same color. And when you multiply anything with 0, you get 0, always. If you multiply anything with 0.5, for example, you're gonna get a result which is half smaller, which would make the image darker. Because if you drop down the values, you get closer to black. So when you multiply this base color with this ambient occlusion, all it's gonna do is it's gonna make the image darker whenever this is gray or black, artificially creating shadows in the texture. Other color mixing types like add or subtract work in the same way. You're literally adding or subtracting the values from the different colors. There are several different ones, but those are slightly more complex. Anyway, that's the nerd section, let's get back to the tutorial. Anyway, like I've said before, all trees are using the same material, so select the second tree, select the bark material, and just click the drop down and replace it with the one we just made. And just do that for all the trees, so they're all using the same bark texture. I'm quickly gonna scale all the UVs so the bark makes sense, and I've also noticed that all the trees are inside armatures, which is technically a rig, which makes no sense for us. So I'm gonna select all trees, and instead of Control P for parent, I'm gonna press Alt P to unparent. Then select Clear Parent and Keep Transformation to unparent everything but keep the trees where they are. Now select all the armatures in the outliner and delete them. We don't need that. Now rename this collection, save the project and open a new one and save it as Tree 4. We're preparing the next model. This model is a .obj file, which you can see by right-clicking and going into Properties. So in Blender, drop down File, go to Import and find wavefront.obj. then search for your model. If you hop in the material view, you see there's no textures in here because OBJ files can't save textures in them. FBX files can, but they don't save roughness and stuff like that. Anyway, we have to add the materials manually, but the UVs should be done already. This model has two materials, one for the bark and one for the leaves. So open the shader editor, select the bark material, and open your downloaded assets folder and search for these textures. And here you can see we're only given the base color and normal map, so let's drag those in and connect them up to the material. Now open up the leaf material, and we also just got base color and normal, so throw those in and plug them in. Now you see the edges of the leaves are black, but if we Control-Shift-click the image twice, so we get to the alpha channel, you can see that the alpha channel is there. And with the alpha channel, whatever is white will be completely opaque, and whatever is black will be completely transparent. So just plug this alpha output into the alpha input of the principal BSDF. Now this kind of looks funny, but this is just a viewport glitch, so this is all fine. Just go into the Material Properties tab and scroll down until you find Settings. Now set the blend mode to Alpha Blend. There you go. And because whoever made these models is not a total idiot, all the trees share the same material, so all three of them should already be done. We can improve these though. We don't have a roughness map. Instead, all of them are just set to a very high value. I'm talking for the bark now. So it's just one value across the entire tree. We have no variation. So what I'm gonna do is I'm gonna take the base color and plug it into a color ramp. Color ramp turns everything into a grayscale image from black to white, and we can use this as a roughness map. But we know that black is reflective and white is not, so I'm gonna raise the colors a little bit, and when I plug this into the roughness, you can see we get a little bit of variation in the reflectivity. For the leaves of the tree, I'm just gonna add some subsurface scattering, just like on all the other foliage. Final tree variation, import the OBJ file, and I've spent a lot of time working on this, and then I realized there's way too many polygons here, and none of the materials are applied, and I cannot be bothered manually doing this for the whole model, so I just deleted everything. Screw that. Okay, there's a lot left to do with all the assets that I've gathered, but before I start working on those, I want to import all of these trees into the main project, because I want to see some progress happen. So I'm gonna open the main scene and add a new collection, which I'm gonna call Trees. Now select this collection before you start importing, so anything you import will be put inside this collection instantly. With this collection selected, go to File, Append, and browse for your first tree model. I'm just gonna import the whole collection, which is tree. Now select the main tree collection again, so the next thing will be imported there, not in the new collection. And again, File, Import, Browse, and just manually import all the trees. Now I'll manually scale these trees because some of them are extremely big for the scene, and of course in the end, apply that scale. And I also noticed that we forgot to parent the branches to the trees, so just select them and press Ctrl-P to parent. Now turn off the tree collection so it's not in the way, and select the floor. We're gonna give it a hair particle system, and first of all, drop down the number of the hairs before you instance anything. These trees are huge. So in the render tab, instead of render as object, this time we're gonna pick render as collection. So this will instance the entire collection as particles. And of course, pick the main trees collection. So click pick random, so it's gonna pick random objects from that collection, but that presents an issue. Some trees are flipped sideways, some trees have no leaves, and so on. I see one of these trees is actually our first tree that we made. So let's troubleshoot. So the reason it has no leaves, it's obvious. Our tree still has all the leaves set as a particle system, and this is not part of the original object. So when it's being instanced, it's just instancing the tree without its particle system. So first, we have to make all the instances real and apply the modifier. Then I parent all the leaves to the trunk, but then my particle system is now instancing random branches. This is because the particle system is choosing random objects from our collection, and a lot of these leaves are individual objects. So what we have to do is we have to merge everything from this whole tree into a single object. Then it's gonna pick the only object there is, which is our tree. Make all the instances real, apply all the particle systems, and merge everything together. We have a similar problem on our second tree, so all of these particles have to be made real, applied, and merged into the same object. The whole tree has to be one object for this to work. But the trees are still flipped on the side, and by the looks of this, it's only my trees that have this issue. So let's see what all the other trees have that mine don't. So they all have a rotation axis of 90 degrees on the X, but they're standing up. Mine are also standing up, but they don't have the rotation value. So all of these other trees are actually modeled sideways, but then they're rotated up to stand up straight. So I just need to flip my trees sideways. So the best thing I think I can do is just rotate my trees sideways and rotate it back in edit mode. And I'll be doing this using the 3D cursor as my pivot point, because both my trees are in the center. So flip the tree on the X by 90 and bring it back in edit mode. Now it all seems to work, but the trees are now everywhere. I need them in specific areas. So once again, we're going to weight paint a mask. Enter weight paint and paint everything except the immediate area around the house, so the house has space to breathe. Rename the vertex group and plug it into the density map of the particle system. Boom, trees. You can play around with the seed to get different results, obviously randomize the scale and whatnot, but now I want to look at this through my camera because that's where it needs to look good. I'm also going to hop back into weight paint mode and remove all the weight in areas that are not in the camera, because then I have extra particles clogging up my memory, but they're not even in the scene, so I want to get rid of all that, and this looks pretty damn good now. I'm also gonna get a sunlight in, rotate it in, and increase the strength, and then preview this in render mode. I think the sun should come from the left because it's on the opposite side of when we're viewing it from. This is an old filmmaking trick, but it works. This looks good now. But I do feel like the pine needles are too flat. It needs more color variation. So select the pine tree that we made and select the pine needle material. Remember part 3 now, because I'm gonna add a noise texture and press Ctrl T to get the mapping nodes. I'm gonna use the object as the coordinate because we don't have any UVs on this. And then I'm gonna add a color ramp node and bring those ends in. Now I'm gonna change the black and the white into 2 pine-like colors. You can also add new handles by clicking the plus and adding more colors to that if you want. Now I'm gonna use this as the new base color input. You can always go back into the noise texture and mess any of the parameters you want to get more variation. But we've got multiple trees and we have to do that multiple times. And clicking around, I realized that the leaves are still using a different material. So just swap all of those out for the same one. Once all that's done, you can just select the previous tree we just made, select the nodes, press Ctrl C to copy, then select the new trees and Ctrl V to paste all these nodes in. This is our randomizer, but the branches already have an image texture, so we need to put this on top of the image texture. So add a mix node and set it to color. Put the original texture into socket 1, put our randomizer into socket 2, and set the blend mode to color as well. The slider will affect how much the color will change into our second color. Now plug this into the base color. Let's also add a brightness and contrast node before the original texture enters the mix node, so we can make the needles a little brighter. Tweak the colors and we're good. For extra control with the trees, I'm gonna turn the original ones visible, and I'm gonna physically scatter them around the scene so they can fill the sky more. And for this, I also need to go into rendered mode because I need to see my shadows. I'm gonna position one of the trees in front of the house so it casts a shadow onto the house. This will make the lighting more interesting and focus your attention on the house because it has nice patterns everywhere. Plus it makes it feel like the forest is denser from all around and there's trees behind the camera as well. Now to reduce the lag, you can always select your floor, go into the particle settings, and in the viewport display, you can drop down the amount. When you hit render, it will still render as everything is normal, but while you're working, it's not gonna be as laggy. Alright, now back to the foliage assets. The trees are now nice. First, we're gonna model the grass. Maybe I should go outside and touch some for once. Nah. Google search for grass blade and find some nice reference photos which you should save in your textures folder. At the same time, I'm going on Sketchfab and finding the rest of my foliage. Branches, bushes, ferns, and so on, but I'm gonna continue on my grass now. Import an image as a plane and browse for the grass reference. Turn on the material view so we can see it. Add a plane, call it grass, and scale it down. Make sure the origin point is at the bottom of the blade grass. What? Make sure that the origin point is at the start of the grass blade and hop into edit mode. I'm also gonna open the object properties tab, and inside viewport display, I'm gonna change the display as to wire. This way it'll show up as a wireframe so I can see what's below me. Now I'm just gonna extrude the upper edge of my grass and move it along. Just extrude, move, and scale so it follows the shape of the grass. Simple as that. I'm tracing the grass. Once that's done, I'll add a new plane while I'm still in edit mode and model the other blade of the grass. Once that's done, go to object properties, display as textured again, so it's back to normal. To give this a new texture, I'll give it a material, call it grass 1 and open the shader editor. I'll bring in the same reference image of the grass and plug it into base color. It's not on the model yet because we haven't done any UVs yet, so open up the UV editor. As you can see, because we started with a plane as the base, it's using the entire UV square. And the original plane has been scaled down all the way to the bottom of the grass, so the entire texture is down there now. We need the texture to follow the shape of the grass. And the easiest way we can do this is to enter the top orthographic mode, press U to bring up the UV menu, and instead of unwrap, we can click project from view. This will project the UVs from the current camera position, and we should get this unwrapped because we modeled it from the same reference of the grass. So the proportions should all be the same, so just scale it up and position it in, and this should mostly be done. But it is a good practice to come in closer and manually correct it, so just bring the vertices in so none of the white areas are inside the UVs, or you'll get a white line on the edge of your grass. You don't want that. Don't be afraid to distort the UVs here, the model is small and will be instanced a lot. No one's gonna see that. Now we can delete the reference photo, and I'll bring my grass blade to the center of the world by resetting the position. I'll rotate it up on the x-axis by 90 degrees so it's standing up, and now Ctrl A and apply rotation so it's back at 0. So the grass blade is now completely flat, but actual grass is 3-dimensional and stuff. So I'm gonna go into edit mode, select the top, turn on soft selection, and tick on connected only. Now I'll just move it left and right on the y-axis. You can also use rotation to help it align better. Just make sure this is connected to the main stem where it's growing out. That's it. Now the grass is pretty low poly, so I can add a solidify modifier here. Now plug the base color into subsurface, and in 4.0 that would be the subsurface weight you have. Even though it's supposed to accept non-color data, it's just gonna treat it as a black and white image. But then I added light and tested it in render mode, and it's way too much. So I just disconnected that and gave the subsurface a tiny value. The subsurface is also way too reddish, so I dropped the red and added some green. Remember, additive light mixing. This is something that requires a bit of tweaking, but just get it where it looks nice. Okay, delete the light, back into material mode. We have to do this a few more times. We need grass variation. We need variety. Mamma mia. I'll put this in a new collection by pressing M, then hiding it and adding the next reference image. The process is exactly the same. Add a plane, trace the grass blade, give it a material with the same texture, project the UVs from view, correct those UVs, turn the blade to stand up and apply transformation, offset this with soft selection, and give it some subsurface scattering. Repeat this until you have a nice variation of grass. And this is a great time to turn on some productive music and just go ham. Yeah, I did that. You can make small patches, individual blades, whatever. Just get as much variety as you can. You can model the blades individually and then merge them together into a patch. Or duplicate them and use the single ones as well. Really, anything. And now you've got a nice variety of grass. Okay, time for some organization. I've been slacking. This is why I keep telling you to stay organized. Then I'm gonna open the main scene and add a new collection called Foliage. I'll make everything invisible, and with my Foliage collection selected, I'll start importing all the assets, from my grass to all the ones that I've downloaded. Rename the materials, connect the textures, we've done all of this before, and of course, always test the result in rendered view to make sure it works. One bush, second bush, which has a lot of materials, so make sure you plug the correct textures in all of them. Fern, branch. You can also add the hue saturation value node to change the colors of things if you want. Then scale all of those things so they're reasonably resized relative to the scene, and then apply that scale. I'm also gonna drag all this underground so they're not in the way, because we're gonna scatter them with the particle system anyway. And then select the floor, and in the viewport display, bring the amount of particles all the way up to 100 so I can see everything at once, because I need a bigger picture on what all this is gonna look like when I add the rest of this. Now we'll add a new weight paint onto the floor for the bushes. Add a vertex group, rename it, have it selected, and jump into weight paint mode. Paint the area around the house and avoid the trees to prevent intersection. I want to leave the path to the house relatively clean and avoid painting things off screen from the camera. When you're done, put the viewport display for the trees back down to prevent lag, and give the floor another hair particle system. This is also a great time to start renaming them all. You have to keep an active effort to stay organized. It's hard. Drop the number, render as a collection, that collection being foliage, bring up the scale, click pick random, add rotation and try different settings. For me, Object X seems to be working fine. Randomize the scale, increase the number, and plug in the density map we just made. Mess with the seed if you must. These are all the things you already know, just make it look good. Now make a new collection, call it Grass. File, append, and bring in the whole grass collection. Whoops, looks like I've got two of the same collections now, so let's just drag one out of the other and delete the other one. Whoops. Drag these grass models underground as well. Now we're adding another vertex group, renaming it and painting a mask just for the grass, which will stay very, very close to the camera. This is the densest particle system, so we don't want to go overboard, we just want to keep it where the camera is. We don't need it 100 meters off into the distance because no one's gonna see that, so just keep it near the camera. You can also paint little patches, that's always fun. Add a new particle system, call it grass, hair, change the number, render as collection, grass, scale, add rotation, Object X, plug in the density map, increase number, randomize rotation and scale, but this grass now isn't very dense and we don't want to add a million particles to this. So I'll be using something called parent particles. Imagine you have a certain amount of real particles, and for every particle, Blender will add a certain amount of fake particles which will just mimic the real one and not actually do anything for themselves. Even though particles are just instancing the same object, so they're not using too much memory, we can further optimize that by having fake particles which mimic real particles. Optimization galore! Drop down the Children tab and press Simple. For every grass blade, there's now 10 additional ones showing in your viewport and 100 individual one in the final render. If you click Interpolate it, this particle spread out and make an even distribution between all the real ones. Drop down the scale and raise the display amount. The actual number of particles is the render amount, in this case 100. The display amount is just there so your viewport doesn't get too laggy because it doesn't show you all of them. When you hit render, the render amount is what's going to be rendered. So if I want to see exactly what I'm going to get, I'm just going to match both of these numbers. Let's try 60 for both, or 80. Looks good. Okay, now we can drop the display amount back to 10 to prevent the lag. We also had a branch, so let's turn on this collection and manually place it in the scene. You can also duplicate around a little bit. This should add some chaos to the scene, but make sure it's actually visible in the scene though, otherwise you're doing it for nothing. If I turn on material mode and display all the particles at once, this is our current work in progress. I'd say it's not looking half bad given all the shortcuts we've taken to get here, but I'll drop all the display amounts for now and maybe add another branch, just because. Now let's get some rocks. I'm also getting these online because they're such minor details, so let's grab a few nice ones and save them into the download assets folder. Back in the project, make a new collection, call it rocks. I'll just import them straight in here, I'm not gonna use a separate project for this. Let's connect all the textures. I only got ambient occlusion, base color, and normal, so I'm guessing that all of these rocks are using the same texture. Throw it all in here, mix color set to multiply for the ambient occlusion, non-color, nothing new, just revisiting. Now I'll just delete the 3 additional material slots, which are there for no reason, so all the rocks are forced to use the first one, and it looks like it was a single texture for all 4. Why are you all adding all these separate materials if they're using the same texture? You don't need separate materials for this, just use one. I'm salty. I will add a hue saturation value node after the base color though, mainly to desaturate them a little bit. Now I'll hop into edit mode, press A to select everything and P to separate. But this time I want to separate by loose parts. So any non-connected geometry will get separated into their own object. So all of these 4 rocks are now individual objects. And because these are so huge, I'm gonna manually distribute them around the scene, you know, to be part of the terrain. Boink. Boink. It helps if you turn on all the trees so you can see where you're placing them better. But I've downloaded another asset, which is a whole collection of rocks, which I'm gonna scatter around like little pebbles in the scene. So make a new collection, call it Scatter Rocks or something, and import the model. I'll make everything invisible so I can see, and these appear to be individual rocks with their own individual textures for every single one of them. Which sounds like a lot of work. So I'll just go through the textures and see which one's colors fit my pine forest and just delete all the rest. Time-lapse time! Now that I've got all these rocks left, I'll give them their respective textures. It's a good thing that both the rocks and the textures are renamed the same way so it's easier to find them. There we go, I'll move them underground again, make everything visible, and drop the particle amount on my trees. Select the floor, give it a new vertex group, call it rock density, go into weight paint mode, paint the area where the pebbles will be, mostly around the camera again. Now make a new particle system, call it rocks, change it to hair, reduce the number, instance collection, shatter rocks, scale, plug in the density, add rotation, randomize it, randomize scale, and mess with the number. Now bring up the display amount for my grass to 100 as well, and play with the seed value. I think I get something that looks nice. Play with the seed value for the rocks as well. Looking all good. If I bring all my particle systems to the max in the viewport display, this is what our scene currently looks like. And it feels pretty natural and messy, just like a real forest would. Now we still have to add some lighting, make the textures for the house and the ground, set up dynamic particle simulations for the grass waving and some fireflies in the sky, and also add some post-processing, some compositing in the end, and then I think we're mostly done. So in the next part, we'll properly UV unwrap the house, create the textures for it as well as the floor. We'll use different color channels to drive different materials. We'll use some procedural shading techniques to give the house more realism and actually address texturing and texture painting, which we've kind of been avoiding so far, but I feel like it's easier to see the surroundings before you paint the material. It has to blend in, you know what I mean? Plus, it's a nice grand finale to the whole thing. Doesn't matter, the episode is over. Your homework for today: you actually have no homework. Finish the scene, add the foliage, and when you get to this point, you have no additional homework. There's nothing really new that we did this episode that you didn't understand before, apart from some smaller tools here and there. So if you've done what I've done, good job. You're free until the next part. Thank you for watching. I hope you're enjoying the course. If you are, you can show that by liking and subscribing. And once again, join the Discord server. We have a wholesome community where you can share your projects, progress, ask questions, and we'll all help you together. If you have any questions, drop them down in the comment section, and I'll see you in the next part. Stay sharp.